Hey guys, this is Ark, and I'm here to show you an updated version of my Frostbolt Ice Nova Hierophant build for the current league, which is Trial of the Ancestors. Now, some of you might remember I made this build all the way back in 3.10, which is Delirium League, and I played it for several leagues after that before Expedition League hit with the massive nerfs. Well, this league, I decided to come back and league start this build to see how it performed, and honestly, it has outperformed my expectations. I would say that this build is back and it is stronger than ever. So I've done all sorts of content with this build now. I've done 40 challenges. I've hit level 100. Here you can see me clearing wave 30 simulacrum, no problem at all. It's pretty good at killing uber bosses. Any non-uber boss will melt instantly. And currently I'm just doing some deli orb farming. I'm clearing 80% deli, juice tropical islands, no issue at all. One thing I have not done much of this league is grinding ranks in the Trial of the Ancestors. Honestly, I don't find that mechanic very exciting, so unfortunately I can't show you how this build performs at high ranks. So with that out of the way, in this video I'm first going to go over how the build plays at a high level, then I'm going to go over some interesting aspects of the build and how they all fit together. I can't go over everything or else this video would take forever, but the PoE is there if you want to dive in yourself. Finally, in the last part, which is more aimed at newer players, I'm going to go over how to search for the best jewels for this build and how to search for the best timeless jewels, as well as how to craft an ideal +2 neck for this build. So the way this build works is pretty simple. You have your two spells, you have your Frostbolt and your Ice Nova. The Ice Nova is the one that does damage. The Frostbolt is kind of like the vehicle that the Ice Nova travels on. So when I cast Frostbolt and then I cast Ice Nova, it's going to expand around 2 of these Frostbolt and it's going to echo 4 times. So when I cast Frostbolt, every single Ice Nova I do will echo 8 different times, which is a pretty powerful DPS multiplier. So in terms of like single target, I'm basically going to put down my Cold Snap, I'm going to Assassin's Mark the boss, and I press Frostbolt and I just spam Ice Nova and it's going to do a ton of damage. And then for mapping, you basically just press this and then you go to the next pack. You usually won't have to cast Ice Nova that many times. Now let's get into some of the more interesting aspects of the build. I'm not going to cover everything because that would take way too long, but you can check out the PoE link to the description below if you want to take a closer look. So we'll start with the Ascendancy, which is Hierophant. The Hierophant Ascendancy provides a lot of damage, a lot of HP, as well as a lot of increased area of effect. And in my opinion, Hierophant currently is the strongest Ascendancy option for this build. And the main reason I say this is the massive buff it got in the 3.21 patch. Specifically the Arcane Blessing node, which makes Arcane Surge grant 20% more spell damage now. And the patch also took away the 10% more spell damage effect from the baseline Arcane Surge buff, and now the baseline only gives us 10% increased cast speed instead. So the net effect of the patch is that any build that uses Arcane Surge, Hierophant got buffed and everyone else got nerfed, so basically Hierophant became a lot stronger relative to everyone else. And finally, I'd also like to note that the 20% more spell damage from Arcane Blessing actually scales with increased effect of Arcane Surge, and we get up to about 100% increased effect from the Ascendancy small nodes and also from one of the wheels in the passive tree. So Arcane Surge is going to give us about 40% more spell damage, which is a pretty insane amount for one node. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that we don't reserve any mana, and there are 2 main reasons for this. One of them is the Hierophant notable, which gives us increased area of effect per maximum unreserved mana. And at the amount of mana we have in this video, we get 88% increased area of effect, which is a pretty large amount. And the second reason we don't reserve any mana is, of course, Mind Over Matter. We get a total of 50% of damage taken from Mana Before Life, 40% from the Keystone, and 10% from a Hierophant notable. So essentially we want to have as much mana as life, and probably a little bit more to serve as a buffer for casting spells. So we essentially end up with this massive HP pool. We got this 2k ES pool and then 4k life and 4k mana for a total of 10k HP. And the result of having such a large HP pool is that we can sort of slack off in some of our other defenses. They don't have to cover everything because we can sort of just tank the hit and recover it back up for the most part. Now we do get one free aura by using the Eternal Blessing support, and for that aura we choose Zealotry. There's a choice between Zealotry and Hatred. Zealotry is my preferred option because it provides a consistent source of consecrated ground for the effect of Bottled Faith. The only reason I would say that you would use Hatred is if you have a really good Watcher's Eye for it, or if you are using the Sublime Vision jewel for Hatred, which makes all your hits inflict brittle. And that is a possible option. It's a very expensive jewel, and you sort of have to gear around that, but that is another option. Now, because we are using the Eternal Blessing support, that means that we cannot use any other auras that reserve mana, not even the cheap ones like Precision or Clarity, unless we make them reserve life, which is going to require 2 gem slots, and in my opinion, it's just not worth it. Another issue with this setup of not reserving any mana is that we are not going to be able to run Grace or Determination. So we need some way to shore up our physical defenses, and the way we do that is with the Body Armor Replica Feral's Fur. So this body armor is incredibly strong for us. It is going to give us a ton of damage and a ton of physical defenses. The way this is set up, you just have Aspect of the Cat Beast crafted as a suffix on either your helm, your gloves, or your boots, and you slot in the gem Less Duration and you're done. This is going to give you a free buff called Aspect of the Cat, which is going to rotate on a 5-second cycle between Cat's Stealth and Cat's Agility, with Cat's Agility taking up 2/3 of the cycle. And Cat's Agility will give you a bunch of cast speed as well as Onslaught, which is going to be pretty nice for DPS. But the main effect is that when you gain Cat's Agility, you instantly gain up to your maximum amount of Endurance and Frenzy charges. The Frenzy charges are very good because as a spellcaster, getting access to Frenzy charge generation is not that easy, and this will give you a lot of damage. But the Endurance charges are also very beneficial because of the interaction with Immortal Call. So in our setup, we have it linked to cast when damage taken, so when we take a big chunk of damage, it will proc our Immortal Call, which will take away all of our endurance charges in order to grant us a huge physical damage reduction buff that lasts for about 2 seconds. And during that time, we are basically not going to die. After that time, unfortunately, we are somewhat vulnerable because we lost our endurance charges. We might have gotten them back if Replica Feral's Fur had cycled during that time, but that's not guaranteed. So the time right after Immortal Call has ended and it's on cooldown still is definitely by far the most dangerous time for us, and you'll generally want to try to play safe during that time. Now I'd like to talk about recovery when we do get hit. So as I'm sure you've noticed throughout this video, when I do get hit, I can leech back my life and ES to full pretty much instantly most of the time. And the reason that instant leech is so strong with this build is that we hit really fast. So the maximum amount of life and ES you can leech per hit is 1%, but because we are hitting so fast, we are basically recovering it all instantly. This effect is so strong that I'm willing to devote 5 points in the passive tree just to get the instant leech. This is a pretty massive investment because 1 point in the passive tree is equivalent to about 3% DPS, so we're giving up like 15% DPS to get this instant leech, but in my opinion it is well worth it. Another thing that helps us get the most out of our recovery is the Corrupted Soul Keystone from the Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel with Doriani. So 50% of the damage we take will bypass our energy shield and go straight to our life and mana, and this means that when we get hits, even if we didn't take away our entire energy shield, we can instantly start leeching our life and energy shield at the same time. Now on the flip side, we have one of the weaknesses of the recovery, which is our mana. So as I'm sure you've noticed, that we are using a mana flask. And I would say this is actually more important than the life flask because we can leech life pretty quickly, but we cannot leech mana. So we do have some level of mana regen, like 300 or so, and this is good enough for our skill usage really, but that is not the main source that we lose mana from. The main source we lose mana from is taking damage from enemies. So if you're taking a lot of damage, you might not notice it on the life and ES because you're recovering those instantly, but it is possible that your mana is taking a hit and you're going to have to use that mana flask. Another situation is if you have a mana siphoner mob on you, that can drain your mana really quickly as well. So the mana flask is actually the best way I found to consistently restore your mana. You can invest in mana regeneration, but it is not very practical because in this game, for whatever reason, you have life regen mods that give you like 175 life regen per second, and then you have mana regen mods that give you like 5 mana regen per second. And then you have to deal with the no regen maps anyways, so the mana flask is really the way to go. Now let's go over and take a look at the skill gem setup, and let's start with the main link, which is of course Ice Nova. The most important support gem in here is Spell Echo, which is going to add the +1 repeats, and that is going to contribute to the DPS multiplier. And also, the entire 6th link has to be in the unique staff Pledge of Hands, which is going to add the 7th link Greater Spell Echo, which is going to add 2 more repeats. So you're only going to get the full 8x multiplier if you're running both the Spell Echo / Awakened Spell Echo and the Pledge of Hands unique staff, which is providing the Greater Spell Echo. For any other weapon to be competitive with Pledge of Hands, it would need to do twice the PoE DPS in order to compensate for losing the Greater Spell Echo. The only realistic candidate is the Annihilating Light Quarterstaff from Searing Exarch. but that is going to absolutely wreck your res, so it's not really a realistic option for this build. Going back to the 6th link, for the rest of the support gems, we are mostly going to slot in whatever increases DPS the most. Usually you'll have increased critical strikes as the last link, but as you get more optimized towards the end game, you may find that you're crit capped, at which point you can replace it with a level 4 in power. And then if you're a really high budget, the absolute best in slot option would be a level 5 Awaken in power. So moving on to the Frostbolt links, the most important one is GMP, which is going to give you enough projectiles to cast your Ice Nova on. The rest of them are sort of quality of life or minor DPS increases. Returning projectiles is pretty nice because it will let your Frostbolts not disappear when they hit a wall so that your Ice Novas can keep bouncing off them. Faster casting will just increase the fluidity of the build and how well it plays. Arcane Surge is a minor DPS increase because it will be a higher level than the one you get from the Hierophant passive. And then Culling Strike is just a DPS increase against bosses. And then Cold Snap is another skill that we just use against bosses. Combined with Bone Chill, it means that the boss will take increased cold damage while standing in it. And then finally we have Assassin's Mark against bosses. That's going to substantially increase our crit chance and crit multi against the boss, as well as giving us power charges. Now you might notice that I have diversion quality on the Frostbolt, which reduces the projectile speed. Now there is a sort of trade-off between having faster projectile speed or slower projectile speed on your Frostbolts. I would say generally slower projectile speed is more desirable because it does increase your single target damage. However, it could feel worse when you're clearing maps if you just want the Frostbolts to travel fast and cover more of the screen if you're able to clear packs instantly anyways. So going over all the gear very briefly, so as we mentioned, we have the Pledge of Hands, and then for most of these pieces, it's basically just going to look like life, mana, and res. Maybe some suppress if you have some spare suffixes. On the ring, you're going to have cast speed as a suffix, which is going to be pretty valuable. On the amulet, we have +2 cold gems, and then crit multi fractured, and then that's also going to give us some attributes. Prior to this, we're using the Pandemonious, which as you can see is less damage, but it's a lot more accessible. On the belt, we just have more life, mana, res. We also have the Flash Charge on crit, which is not strictly necessary, but I find it nice. The Abyss Jewel, okay, so this is the Storm Shroud setup for the end game. The Storm Shroud is pretty nice because it makes us full ailment immune, and we get the chance to avoid being shot just from the Abyss Jewel, which is a pretty high value one, and the belt with the Essence of Torment's 57% chance to avoid being shot. So that gives us full ailment immunity. It's not strictly necessary, but it's nice to have in the end game. Earlier on, you have this node, which gives non-damaging elements at 50% reduced effect on you, and this will basically carry us, combined with the Brine King Pantheon, up until we can get the Storm Shroud set up. This is not ideal for like late end game. Like you'll still find yourself being shocked by like Eater of Worlds and things like that. Even if you have like 95% reduced shock effect, it's still not enough because of whatever reason. Reduced effect of elements is just not that consistent against something like Eater of Worlds. So you're better off just having full immunity and wasting this part of the notable. And then in terms of any other interesting jewels, so in terms of clusters, you can have Blanketed Snow is the strongest notable on a cluster, and then Widespread Destruction, not bad at all. So if you can get Blanketed Snow as one of these two first notables, then you're pretty good. You're in pretty good shape. The other option is what I have in my right jewel, which just has a lot of small node effect. So 3% increased attack and cast speed and 35% increased effect, and then a bunch of other good stuff as well, like Chaos Res and Max Mana. You're probably not going to be able to get this exact jewel, but something like this will be pretty nice. And this is going to give us pretty good damage as well, and it gives me a pretty good option for filling out these last passive points. In terms of normal jewels, you just want life, possibly max mana early on, although max life tends to be better. Crit multi, obviously. Cast speed is also good, although crit multi ends up being a little bit better in the late stages of gearing. And then I also have 50% reduced effective curses on me from jewels, and the rest is going to come from Consecrated Ground. So this is going to give me a total of 100% reduced effective curses on me, which is pretty nice. And the Consecrated Ground is coming from Rational Doctrine. Again, this is a pretty min-max thing. The Rational Doctrine jewel is kind of expensive. It's like 16 divs or something. But the important effect of this jewel is that if intelligence is my highest attribute, it's going to create profane ground on enemies. And profane ground is pretty big. It gives them -10 all res, 100% increased chance to be critically hit. So you see if I uncheck this, my damage goes down. So this jewel is giving me like 10% DPS, which is pretty good for a jewel. But I also have it so that my strength is equal to my int. So I have consecrated ground around me, and then the consecrated ground will linger. And one of the effects of consecrated ground is 50% reduced effective curses on me. So this way I have curse immunity essentially. What else is there? So we have this Watcher's Eye. So these are the two best zealotry mods on Watcher's Eyes, the 10% increased damage and the crit chance. So in the earlier version of this build, like let's bring this to the level 95 version, I'm using a slightly different Watcher's Eye. This one is going to give me cast speed instead of crit chance, and that is because for this version, I'm running the increased critical strikes to give me pretty much crit cap. In this version, like the crit chance mod would be wasted. But as soon as you're changing that increased critical strikes to the Empower setup, you can start running that mod, and it is going to be more damage. Another choice that I made is that I can replace this Rumi's Concoction with a Diamond Flask with cast speed suffix, and as you can see, that is a substantial DPS increase. This will probably be good if you're like farming Uber bosses or anything like that, but for mapping, I definitely prefer the Rumi's Concoction. As you can see, this is a 27% increase to the PoE effective hit pool, which is pretty big, as we are lacking in attack block chance, and also lacking in armor. So let's see. We also have a bit of stun immunity in this Abyss Jewel. We are stun immune if we have killed recently due to this lab enchant. So stun is not really a point of concern for most builds, but it is a point of concern for this build because it is really annoying to get stunned as a self-cast build, and especially if you get stunned on your Frostbolt. If you don't have any Frostbolts to cast on, your Ice Nova will expand around yourself, and that is pretty bad. So yeah, I've definitely tried to go without stun immunity in the past, and every time I get really annoyed when I get stunned. So eventually I just decided I need stun immunity. So that's what this is. Let's see, what else is there? We have the Glorious Vanity. So as mentioned, the Glorious Vanity is going to give us a Corrupted Soul Keystone, and it is also going to give us a bunch of damage. We're going to search for the best Glorious Vanity jewel using the Find Timeless Jewel option here, and it is going to give us something like this. Ritual of Stillness is a pretty good option. Thaumaturgical Aptitude is the other option here, and you're basically going to look for the one that gives you the most damage, as well as giving you the Corrupted Soul. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I guess we should look at the tattoos as well. For the notable one, we have +1 Frenzy. That gives us a bunch of damage for 1 point. It's pretty good. Here we just stacked reduce extra damage from critical strikes. Nothing too important. I have a bunch of quirky ones here as well, like 5% chance to hinder on hit, 10% chance to knock back on hit. This is like small quality of life stuff. It doesn't really matter too much. I have a loyalty tattoo of Rakiata, which gives me, this basically summons a guy on like an 80-second cooldown when you hit a marked unique enemy, and this guy will give you a 110% action speed baseline, so your action speed cannot be slowed below that. So that's like a minor DPS increase if you're fighting like a boss or something like that. And then here with the extra ones, I just have a bunch of chance to block, attack, and spell damage, which is pretty hard to get elsewhere. Now here I'm going to show you how to find the best normal jewels for this build. Jewels in this build are quite important. They give you a lot of DPS and or life, and finding the best one is definitely pretty important, but fortunately it is pretty easy these days with the trade for these items feature in PoE. So all you have to do is click trade for these items. I like to change the search weight, so by default it gives full DPS and effective hit pool. I like to change effective hit pool to specifically say life and mana. This will give you more consistent results. For example, if your res is not capped, If you used effective hit pool, it would prioritize res, but I prefer to just look for life and mana. So hit find best, and then here I know that the best jewel is going to be a base jewel, but early on you can search for base jewels as well. I'm just going to search for base jewels, as this will cut down on the number of mods it's looking for and it will make the search faster. And as you can see, we got a lot of different crappy jewels, and that's because for whatever reason the threshold is set pretty low. The higher you set this threshold, the better the jewels that will turn up in your search, but the more expensive they will be. So let's set this to 80. 80 is a pretty high threshold, so we're going to get some pretty good jewels. As you can see, we get some pretty reasonable ones. This one has like max mana, so it might not be as desirable to other people. That's why it's so cheap. This one is actually pretty good, so this is a pretty good deal for this price range. So yeah, you can just search through these and decide what you want. Now, if you want a special mod that doesn't affect DPS on your jewels, you can add it. So let's say we want to have reduced effective curses on you. So all I have to do is add this here and then set a weight to it. So a weight of 1 is pretty reasonable here. And then we can change the threshold if we want. If we don't, we can just search for it and it will start popping up new jewels that have affixes replaced by reduced effective curses on you. And you can search for mods like this in this way. And then another feature I want to bring your attention to is the Find Timeless Jewel feature, which basically makes finding this glorious vanity just as easy as searching for normal jewels. So all you have to do is click this Find Timeless Jewel, make sure all of these are set as they are here. So the jewel type has to be glorious vanity, the conqueror has to be Giuliani, and we have to be using this jewel socket as it is the best one for us. And then make sure that this filter nodes option is checked as well. This will make it so that only the nodes we have allocated are considered when deciding how good the jewel is. So we do not want any of these to be considered because it is basically never worth it to path to these corrupted notables. So make sure this is checked and then just sort by hit DPS. I think it defaults to full DPS, doesn't really matter. You just hit generates and it's going to generate all these weights, and then hit search. And then it's going to generate all these different seeds that are good for us. Hit copy trade URL and just paste it into your browser. And then it is going to generate all these different options. And then you can search for, you can copy one of these and then import it and see how it performs. So it's been a while since I updated my glorious vanity, so this one might be better. So my current DPS is 660. And when I slot this one in, it becomes 669. So I might be buying this. So yeah, that's how you use the Find Timeless Jewel. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is how to craft your ideal +2 cold amulet. So this is the most involved craft of the build, it's the most expensive one, so if you understand how to craft this, you should have no problem with the other pieces. So you're going to start with a fractured tier 1 global crit multi, either agate amulet or citrine amulets, or maybe even turquoise amulets. Normally it would be citrine for sure for the strength and dex. However, this league, due to tattoos, intelligence is also valuable, so I went with agate personally. It just depends on what you need in your build. So once we have this fractured, we will use alteration orbs until we hit +1 all skill gems. And it is going to take a lot of alterations because this has very low weight, and this is easily the most labor intensive part of the entire process. Unfortunately, that's just how all crafting is. This is using alt plus augment. I tend to just use alteration orbs. I can't be bothered with augmentation orbs because you'll be like using them a lot with a fractured suffix, so it's going to be really annoying to use those. I just use alterations, even though it does make it more expensive. Okay, so let's go ahead and assume that we have all crafted this on and we want to proceed to the next step. Now, unfortunately, the next step is a bit of RNG, but it is a 75% chance that you can proceed. So you will regal and you'll either hit a prefix or a suffix, and our goal is to remove whatever you regaled so that we get a rare amulet with these two mods that were originally on it. So if you regal and you hit a prefix, that is the unfortunate version. So in this case, we have no choice but to YOLO null and hope that we hit the prefix that we got. And in this case, we were lucky. If we were not lucky, then we would have to go back to the drawing board and start using orbs of alteration all over again. Now, if we hit a suffix on the regal instead, let's see, here we go. Instead of doing the YOLO null, which you might still be able to do if you're feeling lucky, but I prefer to just do prefix cannot be changed, scour, and this will turn this into a 2 mod rare. So once we have this, we can do the next step, which is to add the +1 all cold skill gems, and this is a deterministic process. All I have to do is craft multi-mod, there's 2 divs, prefix cannot be changed, which is another 2 divs, and then craft cold damage to attacks. So once we have this crafted, we will go to the harvest craft, add and remove cold. It costs about 3 divs, and then we can slam this, and it will always slam +1 to level all cold skill gems. The reason for this is that we filled all the suffixes, so it has to slam a prefix. The only 2 cold tag prefixes are +1 cold and cold damage to attacks, and we blocked this one by crafting it on, so this is guaranteed. Now the next step, it doesn't really matter which one we remove because we are just going to clear crafted affixes at the bench anyways and proceed to the next step. Now this next step is also rather RNG, unfortunately, and in this step we want to hit a veiled prefix. So the way to do this is to craft prefixes cannot be changed and then unveil T4 actually unveil. So hit this and we got a prefix first try. So this is what we want. If you got a suffix, then you will have to, well, you can try to continue crafting this item, but if you really want the best possible item, you would do prefix cannot be changed, scour, prefix cannot be changed, and then try again. So as you can see, if you fail this, it is going to rack up the currency costs, unfortunately. But let's say we do hit the prefix and then we unveil it. Because we can use either life or mana, it is very, very unlikely that we break this unveil. We can use basically any life or mana mod. I'll choose life here. It doesn't really matter. It just depends on what your build needs. Okay, so let's proceed to the next step. So our prefixes are finished at this point, and we just want to finish our suffixes. And now if you look at these suffixes, the best suffix that we want is cast speed. And fortunately, this is the only caster mod that is a suffix on amulets, so all we have to do is prefix cannot be changed again, and then harvest craft, add, remove, caster. And you can keep doing this until you hit a cast speed level that you want. So let's say we're not satisfied with T3 cast speed, this is pretty low. You can do a prefixes cannot be changed, scour, and then prefix cannot be changed again, and then harvest, add, remove, caster. We got even lower, so that's unfortunate, but you basically just keep doing this until you hit the level of cast speed you want, and then you can bench craft the last affix depending on what your build needs. So it can be like elemental and chaos resistance. I chose like strength and dexterity. It just depends on what you need for your build. And yeah, that's how to craft the ideal necklace for this build. Alright, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.